I might be in one of the world's most repair-friendly countries. This is Cuba. Watch as we travel around Cuba to experience a country cut off from the rest of the world. Nowhere else will you find thousands of 50s, 40s American cars, as well as vehicles from the Soviet Union still driving the streets. Later on, we'll catch up with a local Cuban YouTuber to help show us the repair culture in Cuba, as well as get his perspective on the subject. Cuba is located only about 780 kilometers from the United States, but since 1962 it's had an economic, financial and diplomatic embargo against it from the US, making it the world's longest economic embargoed country. While they can freely trade with other countries, their currency, the Cuban peso, is worthless outside of Cuba. As such, they rely on tourists to bring in international money such as the US dollar or euro, to which they can then use to trade with these other countries. But as you can imagine, this is hard going, and with 50% of the country earning the equivalent of about $160 a month, buying or importing anything new is something most can't afford. So Cuba has become somewhat of a time capsule. They have to make do with what little they have. I made the 27-hour journey across the Pacific Ocean from Australia, transiting through Canada. Totaling 4 flights, it wasn't an easy place to get to, but it was one place I needed to see for myself. What is it like in a country with no other option than repair? To answer this question, we need to ask someone who really knows Cuba. We're here with George from the Spartan Vlog, a popular Cuban YouTuber providing knowledge on Cuba itself.
Hello guys.
I was fortunate enough to run into George on the streets of Havana and thought he would be an excellent addition to this video and help show us the repair culture in Cuba.
Talking about fixing things in Cuba, I think it's very important for everything. In Cuba we don't do it for fun, we do it because we need it, because we cannot import parts or other things from China, for example, as many people do it in other countries. We cannot do it that way, so we try to fix everything. From the shoes to the houses, to the electronic devices, specifically electronic devices.
With electronics being one of the biggest repair sectors in Cuba, it didn't take long to find several phone repair shops. There's almost one on every block. As a phone repairer myself, I thought we should find out how phones are repaired in Cuba. In one of these repair shops, I met Fernando, one of the nicest people I met on my trip. He was more than happy to answer some questions about his repair business. What's the most popular brands do you see? Do you see any Apple, Samsung?
Samsung, iPhone, LG, Huawei, Xiaomi, y copias China.
Do you have any trouble sourcing parts being located in Cuba?
No tengo ninguno. Solo con piezas recuperadas aquí mismo en Cuba. De los teléfonos rotos, recuperadas.
So where do you find the parts phones?
Las personas que se les rompen y me la venden.
Fernando also showed us what tools he's using, consisting of several basic screwdrivers and pry tools, a magnifying glass with built-in light, and some soldering tools. Fernando's got all the essentials, and I really like that magnifying glass. It'd be very useful for the work he's doing and is a great alternative to an expensive microscope setup.
We fix everything, even small cables we also fix it. If the cable is broken, we cut it and we go to some specialist and we fix the cable, because even get a cable in Cuba is complicated.
Everywhere you go, there is someone working on something out in the street, whether a 1950s American convertible, Russian Lada, or Coco taxi. Everyone in Cuba can fix just about anything, down to fixing individual components such as rewinding electric motors. It might not be to a Western safety standard, but it's enough for them to get by.
You can take a look at these people. They have like a bicycle, and they use it to move cement and blocks and stones and things to repair the houses.
Cuba has some of the most amazing buildings I've ever seen, with streets after streets of majestic mansions now owned by the regular class. It's quite obvious that Cuba was a very wealthy country in the past from its once booming sugarcane industry. It has buildings comparable to those in places like France, only most of Cuba's buildings outside the main squares are neglected and falling down due to a lack of maintenance. Most simply cannot afford the cost, even after subdividing the insides of these mansions. There is nothing anything close to this in Australia, but even if there was, it's unlikely the government would protect them, so property developers would demolish them to build hideous apartment blocks. Because unfortunately, that's the way of the West.
There are people that they work on the garbage, you know? They take it from the street and they are supposed to put it in the place where the garbage goes in Cuba to be burned. But before that, they check everything. If they find something that could be useful for other people with less resources, they sell it to other people.
It's important to understand just because Cuba repairs everything, that alone doesn't make it an environmentally friendly place. Repair and reuse is something Cuba takes to the extreme, but things such as improper waste disposal and excessive carbon emission cause the country to still be very polluted. Cuba has gained a reputation because of its old cars. As such, it has a strong car culture. You'll find a mix of original survivors and done-up Lada-powered American cars. We spent our time cruising in a 1954 Buick Roadmaster, which still had its original driveline and interior. But in Cuba, you can't always buy what you need, so they have to make it. There is quite a few heavily modified cars getting around the streets. Of the modified cars, most are DIY utes. These can be fully custom or made by retrofitting the back of another car onto the original. A 1950s sedan with the back cut out of it and a tray welded in is the kind of thing you'll never see anywhere else. Throughout our month-long stay, we also made use of local shared taxis that roam the streets as well as private taxis. Essentially, you just hitch a ride from a stranger driving by and pay them a few dollars.
The original motor? Yes, it's original.
Does it overheat much?
No.
No? During the trip, we stayed with many local Cubans who were renting out rooms in their houses. One of them had a black and white Soviet TV from 1978. His father purchased it when he was just 3 years old. It's still used to this day. Connected with a bunny ear antenna, it still receives signal as Cuba still broadcasts analog TV. As for internet and phone connection, they only recently got 4G, but still have an operational 2G network. Their internet is incredibly slow, unreliable, and hard to come by. All of it is run by the government, so there's only one ISP. Both locals and tourists are required to buy time-limited authentication cards to be able to access the internet. And as of the US embargo, a lot of websites are blocked unless you use a VPN. Cuba is a full-on country, but if you love old cars and buildings as much as my family does, it's worth the trip. But if there's one thing I didn't enjoy, it would be the food. With that, I'd like to thank George for appearing on the video.
I hope to see you around my channel. It's basically around Cuba, focused on Havana and the rest of the provinces. We most talk about how is life in Cuba, some images are very hard to watch, but I think it's going to be interesting because it's a completely different world to what you're used to.
There is a lot of waiting around in Cuba, from entering shops, buying food, or recharging phone credit. Even the bus service requires you to arrive and check in 2 hours before it leaves. They have to be some of the most patient people in the world. There's very few English speakers in this country, but I've done my best to show you guys from the West what it's like in a country cut off from the rest of the world. They have to fix what they already have. It's certainly been an experience, almost like time travel, back to the 1950s or even 60s. There really isn't another place like Cuba. Other than the food, I've really enjoyed my stay here. And on that note, this has been a Hugh Jeffries video. If you like what you saw, consider subscribing, and I'll catch you guys next time.